lies. In most cases, there seemed to not have been a military presence at the affected sites or in their vicinity. The Commission deplores that attacks continue to take place, harming civilians and medical institutions which have protected status. The breach of the dam at Nova Kakhovka on 6 June 2023 and the consequent floods have destroyed or rendered uninhabitable hundreds of dwellings and has ecological and economic implications. The Commission is investigating the cause of the breach and its impact on the civilian population. The Commission has also focused its investigations on violence against personal integrity in regions which fell under Russian occupation for prolonged periods, namely in Kherson and Zaporizhzhia. It has collected further evidence indicating that the use of torture by Russian armed forces in areas under their control has been widespread and systematic. The principal targets of torture were persons accused of being informants of the Ukrainian armed forces. The Commission has found that torture mostly took place in various detention centers controlled by Russian authorities. Similar methods of torture were used across different facilities during interrogation sessions, mainly aimed at extracting information from the victims. This led to severe pain and suffering. A victim who suffered torture through electric shock stated, "Every time I answered that I didn't know or didn't remember something, they gave me electric shocks. I don't know how long it lasted. It felt like an eternity." In some cases, torture was inflicted with such brutality that it caused the death of the victims. The Commission continues to map and document such facilities, reinforcing its findings that torture was widely used by Russian authorities. Further, the Commission has found that in the Kherson region, Russian soldiers raped and committed sexual violence against women of ages ranging from 19 to 83 years, often together with threats of commission or other violations. Frequently, family members were kept in an adjacent room, thereby forced to hear the violations taking place. The armed conflict has many devastating consequences for children. In particular, the Commission has continued to investigate individual situations of alleged transfer of unaccompanied minors by Russian authorities to the Russian Federation. It regrets that there is a lack of clarity and transparency on the full extent, circumstances, and categories of children transferred. The Commission is of the view that insufficient knowledge about the precise number and circumstances of children transferred may hamper an expeditious return process. The Commission is also concerned about allegations of genocide in Ukraine. For instance, some of the rhetoric transmitted in Russian state and other media may constitute incitement to genocide. The Commission is continuing its investigation on such issues. The Commission reiterates its deep concern at the scale and gravity of violations and corresponding crimes that have been committed in Ukraine by Russian armed forces and emphasizes the need for accountability. It also recalls the need for the Ukrainian authorities to expeditiously and thoroughly investigate the few cases of violation by its own forces. Distinguished President, Excellencies, as highlighted in its conference room paper, the Commission recalls the paramount importance of judicial and non-judicial accountability, including measures that support the needs of the victims, such as effective mental health and psychosocial support. The Commission also reiterates the need for coordination and the avoidance of duplication between the various actors in the crowded accountability space in Ukraine. This relates both to judicial and non-judicial accountability measures. We continue our efforts to collect evidence which may be of use for judicial accountability purposes. Furthermore, regarding reparations, the Commission urges the international community to make sure that recognizably necessary national reconstruction programs or property restitution programs are not designed to the detriment of victims' reparations. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. According to our practice, we will start by hearing from the delegations of the countries concerned. The Secretariat has informed me that the Russian Federation is not in the room. I therefore give the floor to the representative of Ukraine.
Respectful members of the United Nations Human Rights Council, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, Commissioner Moser, Commissioner de Graaf. It's an honor for me to address United Nations Human Rights Council for the first time, though unfortunately due to the massive atrocities committed to a shocking degree by Russia in course of its war of aggression against Ukraine. It has been 78 years since the adoption of the United Nations Charter that reaffirms faith in fundamental human rights and respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity. Along with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the lengthy list of human rights treaties, they represent binding commitments for the state and as members of the international community. Yet, we witness how Russia brazenly assaults those values. Till today, accountability for Russia's criminal legacy in Chechnya, Georgia, Ukraine and Syria was largely lacking, which has paved the way to its full-scale aggression against Ukraine. We are grateful to the United Nations Human Rights Council for its rapid response by setting up of the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine, with a clear mandate to investigate all alleged violations and abuses of human rights and humanitarian law, as well as related international crimes in the context of aggression against Ukraine by the Russian Federation. The work of the Commission and its findings are an integral aspect of the accountability architecture. We commend the Commission for its efforts and express our commitment to continue cooperation and dialogue. Restoring justice will require not only years but decades of commitment, as we continue to document, investigate and prosecute over 100,000 incidents of war crimes, ranging from willful killing, summary execution, torture and ill treatment, to indiscriminate shelling and unlawful confinement. More than 19,000 Ukrainian children have become the victims of the ill-fated practice of the forcible transfer and deportation planned and implemented by top leadership of Russian regime. Ukrainian children are stripped of their Ukrainian citizenship and put for adoption. It is a war crime and crimes against humanity that also could amount to crime of genocide in line with the 1948 Genocide Convention. In parallel, thousands of Ukrainian prisoners of war are subjected to torture and conflict-related sexual violence as part of established policy that Russia uses against detainees. This pattern of crimes and existing evidence establishes a reasonable basis to believe that the crime against humanity of persecution is being committed against the Ukrainian national group by Russia. The conduct of the Russian invasion and subsequent occupation has been accompanied by numerous violations on discriminatory grounds, which were also detailed in part in the Commission's previous reports. Therefore, documenting and ensuring full accountability both on national and international level is paramount, along with the reparation of the damage suffered by the millions of victims and survivors. In this regard, the Commission's dedication, efforts and contribution to the quest for justice and accountability, for establishing sustainable peace and stability, remains indispensable. We hope to see continuation of this path. Thank you for your attention.
Gracias.
Thank you. I must inform you that the list of speakers is now closed. I will now invite the interested delegations to ask questions to the members of the Commission of Inquiry and to comment on their presentation. The speaking time is 1 minute and 30 seconds for all speakers. I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Gabrielius Landsbergis, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania, who will speak on behalf of a group of countries.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the Nordic Baltic states, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Iceland, Latvia, Norway, Sweden, and my own country, Lithuania. For 19 months, Russian armed forces continue to indiscriminately and deliberately kill, torture, commit acts of sexual and gender-based violence against Ukrainian civilians and destroy vital infrastructure in clear violation of international humanitarian law. Furthermore, the Russian authorities' unlawful deportation and transfer of children from Ukraine to Russia, occupied territories in Belarus, in their illegal adoption there may constitute war crimes. We condemn these practices in the strongest possible terms. The ICC's decision to issue arrest warrants for Russia's President Vladimir Putin and Children's Rights Commissioner Maria Lvova-Belova is an important step towards accountability. We must ensure the safe return of Ukrainian children and accountability of the perpetrators. There must be no impunity for Russia's violations of international law. The investigations must continue until full accountability and justice are ensured. Therefore, we strongly support the work of this Commission of Inquiry. We also support the register of damage caused by the aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine, established under the auspices of the Council of Europe. Russia must pay for the damages caused by this war. Mr. Erik Mose, after your last visit to Ukraine, how could efforts be strengthened to ensure justice for all victims, including comprehensive reparation programs? I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. The European Union has the floor.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The EU thanks the Commission of Inquiry for their update and its work in investigating alleged violations and abuses of international law stemming from the Russian aggression against Ukraine. We reiterate our resolute condemnation of Russia's war of aggression, as well as a continued military support for Russia provided by Iran and Belarus. The EU remains unwavering in our support for Ukraine's independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. Not only is Russia putting global food security at risk, but in areas under occupation, Russian authorities have committed willful killings, indiscriminate attacks on civilians, unlawful confinement, torture, rape and other forms of sexual and gender-based violence, as well as unlawful deportations, including of children. We are deeply concerned that the growing body of evidence presented in your report show that many of these violations amount to war crimes. It also finds that torture used by Russian authorities has been widespread and systematic and may amount to crimes against humanity. We are outraged at these systematic and widespread violations, and we agree with the Commission that comprehensive accountability is paramount. Could the Commission elaborate on possible mechanisms for ensuring the safe returns of civilians, especially children who remain in Russia captivity? Thank you so much.
Gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Denmark on behalf of a group of countries.
Madam Vice President, Mr. Chair, I am pleased to deliver this statement on behalf of the Group of Friends of Accountability following the aggression against Ukraine. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is clear. The prohibition on torture applies at all times and all circumstances. But even as we are commemorating the 75th anniversary of the UDHR this year, countless of Ukrainians have suffered torture and other grievous acts at the hands of the Russian authorities, depriving Ukrainians of their inherent dignity and their aspiration to live free from fear. We say to these survivors, we see you, we stand with you. Mr. Chair, your reporting is clear. The Commission has found a widespread pattern of torture and inhuman treatment committed by Russian authorities, which may amount to crimes against humanity. You have gathered evidence that a wide range of grave human rights and humanitarian law violations, many amounting to war crimes, have been committed. Impunity for international crimes is not an option. We will continue to seek full accountability, including for the crime of aggression, because victims deserve justice. We therefore welcome the reporting of the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine the work of the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine and relevant UN Special Procedure mandate holders, the investigation by the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, the operationalization of the International Center for the Prosecution of the Crime of Aggression against Ukraine, the establishment of the Register of Damage for Ukraine, and the work of the core group towards a tribunal on the crime of aggression against Ukraine. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Gracias.
Thank you. UN Women has the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. UN Women thanks the Commission for its tireless investigation of human rights violations and violations to international humanitarian law. In particular, UN Women acknowledges the work of the Commission to document sexual violence. In its most recent report, the Commission recounted heartbreaking evidence of sexual violence perpetrated by Russian authorities against women, men, girls, and boys ranging in age from 4 to 82. UN Women is committed to supporting survivors with access to essential services and promoting access to justice, including reparations. UN Women also wishes to emphasize the deeply gendered nature of all violations recounted by the Commission. As a result of structural gender inequality, the impact of, for example, attacks against Ukrainian infrastructure or the transfer of and deportation of children depends on the gender of the victim, among other intersecting aspects of their identity. The Commission has an important role to play in providing the Council with an intersectional gender analysis of violations to ensure that future justice and reconstruction efforts serve the needs of the entire population. Mr. President, UN Women stands ready to work with partners to promote accountability for sexual and gender-based violence, respond to the gender impacts of violence and aggression, and to support an enabling environment for women's meaningful participation in the equitable and sustainable reconstruction of Ukraine. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Switzerland has the floor. Madam Vice President, Switzerland would like to thank the Commission of Inquiry for its important work in investigating and reiterates its support. Switzerland is deeply concerned with the findings of the Commission, which show the deterioration of the human rights situation in relation with the military aggression of Russia against Ukraine. The reports and accounts of incidents of rape, torture and other inhuman acts perpetrated against civilians and prisoners of war in areas under control of the Russian Federation are deeply concerning. The amount of all of these credible allegations highlights the need for the mandate of the Commission of Inquiry. For Switzerland, accountability is essential. This must be based on all facts, the gathering of evidence, and the identification of those responsible for human rights violations and violations of international humanitarian law. We welcome the approach of the Commission of Inquiry focused on victims and survivors. Switzerland calls on all parties to respect international humanitarian law and human rights. It calls on the Russian Federation to cease its attacks against the civilian population, civilian infrastructure, and calls for a guarantee of access to the Commission of Inquiry. Chair of the Commission, what is your approach to access regions of Ukraine currently occupied by the Russian Federation in order to proceed with your inquiry into the situation? Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Liechtenstein.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. We thank the Commission for its oral update and its crucial work on accountability. The recently published conference room paper based on a detailed account of the evidence gathered showcases the brutality and the wide range of grave human rights and humanitarian law violations committed by the Russian armed forces. We condemn the systematic and widespread use of torture, the willful killings of civilians and summary executions, attacks on civilians, rape, unlawful confinement, and unlawful transfers, as documented by the Commission. Liechtenstein strongly supports the establishment of a special tribunal on the crime of aggression, as aggression is ultimately the origin of all other international crimes committed in Ukraine. Given that the crime of aggression is a leadership crime, it is also of crucial importance to ensure that there are no immunities. In conclusion, I would reiterate Liechtenstein's solidarity with Ukraine and its people. Moreover, we strongly support the Commission's important work. I thank you, Madam Vice President.
Gracias.
Thank you. The Republic of Korea has the floor.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The Republic of Korea thanks the Commission of Inquiry for its update. As Russia's illegal war against Ukraine shows no sign of abating, we remain profoundly concerned by the devastating consequences of the ongoing conflict. Reports of continued human rights violations and attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure are truly alarming. It must stop immediately. In particular, we deplore the recent attacks on Ukrainian port facilities, which risk having far-reaching impact on global food security. Equally troubling are the Commission's findings of willful killing, unlawful confinement, torture, and sexual violence. We stress once again that ensuring accountability for all violations of international human rights and international humanitarian law is vital to achieve justice for victims and prevent further violations. We strongly support the crucial work of the COI on Ukraine in this regard. Lastly, the Republic of Korea reaffirms its solidarity with the people of Ukraine and reiterates that the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence of Ukraine should be respected. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Czechia has the floor.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Czechia aligns itself with the EU statement and thanks the Commission for its update. Your presentation has provided evidence of the devastating impact of the Russian aggression on civilian lives of Ukrainians and of a wide range of human rights and humanitarian law violations and corresponding crimes. It is outrageous that Russian authorities committed willful killings, attacks on civilians, unlawful confinement, torture, rape and sexual violence, or deportation of Ukrainian children and civilians to Russia. Moreover, as a result of barbaric Russian actions such as mining the fields or blowing up the Kakhovka Dam, Russia is committing crimes against the environment, making the regions uninhabitable for hundreds of thousands of civilians. Perpetrators, including at the highest level, must be brought to justice. Russia must be held accountable for all committed crimes. Horrendous war crimes from last 2 years should not overshadow continuously dire human rights situation on Crimean Peninsula, illegally occupied by Russia. Once again, we want to raise our voice for seriously ill Crimean political prisoners such as Irina Danilovich, Emir Usenkuku, or Volodymyr Dudka. We call on Russian authorities to immediately and unconditionally release all Ukrainian political prisoners. Could the Commission please elaborate on possibilities of monitoring and access to places of detention of Ukrainian prisoners in Russia or territories occupied by Russia? Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Italy has the floor.
Vice President, Italy aligns itself with the EU statement. The Italian position on the Russian aggression against Ukraine is very clear and well known. We stand with Ukraine and its people, which are fighting to defend their freedom, sovereignty and independence and territorial integrity against a blatant violation of United Nations Charter. This unprovoked and unjustified war continues to cause enormous suffering to the Ukrainian people. We reiterate our support for the investigations by the Commission of Inquiry and other initiatives to ensure accountability for the violations of human rights and international humanitarian law and related crimes in Ukraine, including attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure, summary executions, torture, sexual and gender-based violence, as well as unlawful transport and deportation of children. The repercussions of the conflict in Ukraine affect all our society, and in particular the most vulnerable countries, increasing in particular food insecurity. Therefore, Italy firmly condemns Russia's decision to suspend participation in the Black Sea Grain Initiative. A comprehensive, just and lasting peace remains our ultimate goal, and Italy supports President Zelensky's 10-point peace formula. We are also at the forefront of reconstruction efforts in Ukraine, which will be one of the top priorities of the Italian presidency of the G7 next year. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Slovenia, you have the floor.
Madam Vice President, we align with the EU statement. We would like to thank the Commission of Inquiry for its update. Slovenia welcomes the recently published conference room paper, which highlights patterns of a wide range of violations by the Russian armed forces that target the civilian population to inflict extensive fear, misery, humiliation, and destruction. The body of evidence that the Commission has found regarding acts committed by the Russian authorities in areas that come under their control is substantial. The maltreatment of children is especially telling of the inhumanity of the aggressor. Children were transferred or deported to Russian-occupied areas or to the Russian Federation. They were separated from their family. Instead of facilitating the reunion of families, the Russian authorities dispersed them with the aim of facilitating long-term placements of Ukrainian children in the Russian Federation. This cruel policy was in complete disregard of the child's rights to preserve his or her identity and family relations. Slovenia supports the recommendations made by the Commission to investigate and prosecute all allegations of international crime, violations of human rights and international humanitarian law. The Commission recently called for the establishment of comprehensive repatriation programs. Could you please share your thoughts on where to start and how to achieve such wide-ranging accountability? I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. Portugal, you have the floor.
Vice-Presidente. Portugal aligns with the European Union statement and with the statement of the Group of Friends of Accountability following the aggression against Ukraine. We thank the Commission of Inquiry for its oral update. We express our support for the crucial work it has been conducting, documenting the violations and abuses of human rights in Ukraine following Russia's illegal and unprovoked aggression. Today's update and previous reports were the result of thorough efforts in collecting evidence, in assessing its credibility and analyzing patterns. They show that there are serious violations of international law happening in Ukraine's territory committed by Russia's armed forces that may amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity. The Commission has unearthed solid evidence of willful killings, attacks on civilians, unlawful confinements, torture, rape and deportation of children. Now that the facts are established, accountability must follow. The international community cannot turn a blind eye to these findings. Impunity cannot be an option. Portugal will continue to back all accountability efforts, namely at the UN, which includes ensuring that victims receive justice and reparation. Muchas gracias.
Gracias.
Thank you. Finland, you have the floor.
Mrs. Vice President, Finland aligns itself with the EU statement. We firmly support the Commission's indispensable mandate. The evidence gathered by the Commission demonstrates that Russian authorities have committed acts of sexual and gender-based violence involving women, men and girls. These brutal acts include rape, threat of rape, sexual slavery and forced nudity, often taking place during detention or forced visits to victims' houses. As the recent conference room paper of the Commission states, these violations severely impact victims and their families. Some survivors have left their communities due to stigma. Let me underline, rape and sexual violence may amount to torture, war crimes and crimes against humanity. Russia must immediately end these grave violations. Victims and survivors deserve full accountability and access to justice. Russia's aggression disproportionately impacts persons in vulnerable situations. 2.7 million persons with disabilities are affected, often unable to seek safety and without access to even most basic services. These barriers need to be made visible. Mr. Merse, how can we more effectively address the needs of persons in vulnerable situations? I thank you.
Gracias. Ella fue la...
Thank you. This was the last speaker that we could accommodate for this meeting. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, this brings us to the end of this session. We will reconvene at 3 p.m. to continue the interactive dialogue on the oral update of the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine, followed by the interactive dialogue with the Independent International Fact-Finding Mission on the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. I hereby close the 21st meeting of the 54th session of the Human Rights Council.